Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the fifth chapter of Acts. We're going to cover the verse range of 12 through 26. We're going to read of the activity of the apostles, which culminated in their arrest. After comes their trial before the Sanhedrin, and before then comes the punishment and vengeance and wrath on two wayward members of the early Christian community. They were at least 5,000 strong this time, in the economic principle which they agreed to adhere to was one of communalism. They held all their possessions together as one in order that there may be none poor among them. But two members of the community, a husband and wife team by the name of Ananias and Sapphira, they kept back part of the profits because they had lingering doubts about the mission's ability to succeed. And so they presented them, when they presented their credentials to be included in the camp, they laid down a significant sum of money, the proceeds from a house, but it was not the full amount. And this is revealed to Peter in the form of the Ruach Kodesh, verse 3. But Peter said, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Ruach Kodesh and keep back from the price of the land for yourself? Ananias is a common name. It is also the name of the one who ministered to Paul and who baptized Paul when he was blinded from his encounter with the resurrected Messiah in the 9th chapter. But this is a bad Ananias, and he had been tricked by the spirit of Satan was in him. He was not lying. He was not stealing from the community. He was in fact stealing from to steal from the people of God is to steal from God himself, and so he was selfish in keeping for himself what belonged to the community. And why have you conceived this deed in your heart? You have not lied to men, but to Elohim. Altogether different degree of punishment and gravity. When you lie to men, you betray their trust, you forsake that, but you lie to Elohim. That's you're jumping off a deep water cliff. Then Ananias, hearing these words, fell down and breathed his last, and great fear came upon all those who heard of this. So once his sin had found him out, first off, his sin was a little older, but Peter had found it out, and the Ruach Kodesh speaking in him and through him had exposed him, and just like that, he's instantaneously collapses onto death, and this has the effect of stimulating and inspiring and inciting the emotion of fear over all those who heard of this. Not all saw it, but they all heard of it. And so this would have been a test to their faith, and also a message and a warning, don't mess around. You're not lying or stealing from us. You're lying and stealing to Elohim. And then about 3 hours later, his wife by the name of Sapphira comes in, and she wants to know where her husband is. And Peter asked her, what was the price that you paid for? And she says that it was the amount that they had given. Verse 9, so Peter said to her, why have you agreed to try the Ruah of Yahweh? Look, at the feet of those who have buried your husband are at the door, and they shall carry you out. So to tempt Elohim, or the Ruah of Yahweh, these are both members of Elohim, would have been forbidden according to Deuteronomy 16:16, or 6:16 rather. So that's an altogether, when you're lying and stealing from him, that's a dangerous, grave territory, and she invites the same consequences, and the same immediacy and urgency of her death is accomplished swiftly and suddenly. And they were already there, and she was going to collapse instantaneously. They were going to bury her, just because they had already done so. And, immediately she falls down, and they bury her beside her husband. And great fear came upon all the assembly and upon all those who heard of this. So this fear was necessary to send the message that there is no exploitation, there is no secret sin that will not be found out and exposed and punished. If you steal and lie from all of us, you are, not only stealing and lying to us, but also to Elohim. So fear was the necessary emotion to be stimulated. Now we're going to cover the range of 12. This is a negative scene, but it gets positive and ends negatively. They're doing all these miracles and wonders and ministerial activity and outreach with evangelical effectiveness, but their activity prompts the attention of the temple guard, who sees them and arrests them and drag them to the Sanhedrin. 12th verse. And through the hands of the apostles, many signs and wonders were done among the people, and they were all with one mind in Solomon's porch. So it was through the hands, but it was in the power of the name. The name is the controlling element which caused the lame man who was lame from birth to leap up in the 3rd chapter. In this, they had been they had been tried in the temple before. They're going to be tried again because they're doing all these miracles. The power and authority had been delegated to them. All they had to say was the name with sincerity and emphasis, and the power was theirs, and the miracles were done. And the unity of mind, this is one of the traits of the model for assembly unity as outlined in Acts 4, 42 through 47, that unity of mind, that means they're in perfect harmony of agreement. There's no division, there's no contention, there's no quarrel, there's no factionalisms on them. And Solomon Porch was the location they were in the 1st verse of the 4th chapter. It would have had 27 feet tall colonnades, and it would have been on the outer gate of the outer temple. But of the rest, no one had the courage to join them. However, the people made much of them. So it's the contradiction between this verse and the next verse, where they are exploding in numbers, is only apparent. This is only to say that the fair weather face, those who had ulterior motives or private agendas, would know better. They would receive the signal and the warning and the message not to mess around, because you will be judged and instantly struck in. So that eliminated the phonies. This was a necessary winnowing of the wheat from the chaff, because a sinner had crept in and sinned against the entire camp and assembly. So this had the repelling effect of other sinners. So this was necessary. A lot of people caused to question the love and the justice of a God who would kill anyone, but it was necessary and defensible. But the apostles and the assembly and the saints enjoyed honor and esteem amongst the crowd. The people had never seen anything like this. And as per custom, as we witness in the gospel, usually the crowd is in the Messiah's corner, but the religious rulers, the authorities, are actively and hostilely aligned against him, and that's what we witness here. Verse 14, and more believers were added to the master, large numbers of both men and women. This is the first reference of female believers, but the dividing line between male and female is obliterated through the good news. Read Galatians 3:28. They're neither bond nor free, neither Greek nor Jew, nor man nor woman, but all are one in the Messiah. But this is not the first reference of their evangelical explosion. In the tail end of the second, at the second 41 or 42, we read that their numbers on Pentecost, they had 3,000, and that number eventually expands to 5,000 in 4:4. So it's over 5,000 now. The longer they stay, and the assembly is only in the nucleus of Jerusalem at this point. Well, it actually spread to Judah because Barnabas purchased the camp where Ananias was slayed. But this activity takes place away from the camp where they had camped on the outskirts of Jerusalem. Technically, they had spread it to Judea. To Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and then to the ends of the earth, Acts 1:8. And so they brought the sick into the streets and laid them on beds and couches, so that at least the shadow of Peter passing by might fall on some of them. Same thing, same order of operation, same activity of those who are sick and in need, gravitating around the Messiah. Entire towns, the sick population and the crippled and the blind and the demon-possessed would have been brought to him at once, and he'd be there, for several hours just casting all these sicknesses out them. And they're doing the same thing to the apostles, in whom his power resides and dwells. So they have access to his power, and as such they're coming to him. And the shadow of Peter, this was their faith. There was a woman who one time touched the garments of the Messiah's lower robe, the tassel of his robe, and that was where her faith rested, and that was how she was healed. But the Roman centurion said, "Say the word," and it will be done. And he had never seen faith like this in anyone in all Israel, the Roman centurion. So, the shadow was what it took. Some people's faith is necessary. They think you have to do something, you have to say it, or sometimes he touches the eyes. There's no uniform pattern to what he does physically to do a healing, but the physical details are there, and they're somewhat important. A large number also gathered from the surrounding cities to Jerusalem, bringing sick ones and those who were troubled by unclean spirits, and they were healed. So sickness is often satanically sent, but often it's just the course of the natural world, and there's no supernatural or providential work involved in the sickness. Sometimes it just comes, but demon possession is 100% of the time satanically sent. He has demons, which are the fallen angels, those who joined Lucifer in his rebellion, and they are beings without bodies. They were disembodied, not as a consequence of them following Lucifer's rebellion originally, but a careful reading of Genesis 6:2 reads that they had physically, sexually penetrated the human race, and that's what caused the imaginations of men to be, imaginations of their heart to be only evil continually. So the global genocide that came down from the flood was not necessarily a genocide of humanity, but it was a demon-humanic hybrid. But their touch and their power, they have the power of the Messiah. They have the power in the name, at the name, the demons tremble. They instantly recognize it, and they submit, and they are cast out, and they are healed instantly, totally, permanently. But the high priest rose up, and all those with him, which were the sect of the Sadducees, and they were filled with jealousies. In the master's ministry, the primary antagonists from the community are the Pharisees, and the Pharisees and the Sadducees were two mutually antagonistic sects. They were the dominant divisions within Judaism. But the reason that the Sadducees won, most of their activity, the Messiah primarily ministered at the synagogue. It wasn't until the tail end of his ministry, but John places him there in the earlier years. But because the Pharisees would have reigned supreme at the synagogue level, and the Sadducees would have had the upper pull in the temple. The Sadducees were the wealthy aristocrats. They were appeasers and collaborators. They were the limousine liberals of their days. They denied angels and the resurrection, and that's another thing that motivated their fierce opposition. The Pharisees believed in the resurrection, but once the resurrection became real and proven, then the Sadducees had all the more venom to suppress that which they were determined to defend to the death, that there was no resurrection. And they also believe that there are no angels, but an angelic being accomplishes the apostles' deliverance from their premature traps, as we read. And envy is the motivating factor, is an evil, ugly emotion. It's not a flattering quality, but it's hard to resist when you are consumed by envy. That envy degenerates into hatred, and hatred leads you to destruction. And seized the apostles and put them in public jail. So because they were jealous, they were doing all these signs and wonders, and they were preaching and proclaiming the resurrection, which they denied. The resurrection had come past. The 40-day period was 7 days before Pentecost, and some time had eclipsed since then and elapsed. But they're in jail for the crime of performing healings and signs and wonders that they could not do, and it was all motivated in pettiness, enviness, jealousy, and vengeance, the baser instincts of human nature, and not any principle of legitimate, equitable jurisprudence. But an angel of Yahweh opened the prison doors at night and brought them out and said, "Go and stand in the temple and speak to the people all the words of this life." So they have enemies, but they also have allies. They have enemies on earth. These are the ones with the pull and leverage to arrest them and put them in prison, but they also have an ally, heavenly allies, angels, ministers, and heavenly beings who minister on behalf of humanity, and they open the doors, they liberate them at night. So they're in there for some time, but at night when everyone's asleep and the hour is right, they are liberated. They open the prison doors and unchain their shackles and everything else, so they are free men. And where does he command them to go but to the site, to return to the site at which they had been arrested? And this was necessary to bring them to the trial to the Sanhedrin, where the early Christian experiment is ultimately absolved of the plan of extinction by the prudent moderation of Gamaliel, the disciple of Saul, who we read was the earliest, most violent antagonist of the Christian sect. We meet him in the 8th chapter, 7th rather. And now when they heard, they went into the temple early in the morning, and they were teaching. But the high priest and those with him came and called the council together with all the elders of the children of Israel, and sent to the prison for them to be brought. So there in the temple, the same site they had been arrested, they did not resist the commandment of an angel. They took it seriously, they treated it with gravity, and they obeyed it promptly. And to the letter, they were there in the morning early, first thing bright and early. They had been liberated at night. They do not waste much time getting busy. They're up and at 'em. Early bird gets the worm. And they are teaching, and the priest and his party and entourage, anyone who's anybody among the elders of Israel, they knew that they had arrested them and imprisoned them, so they're summoning them to be brought, and they are in for a rude awakening and a surprise when they are not there. But where should they find them but right under their very noses, in the very temple, being led and guided there by an angel in order to give the witness of the words of life. But having come, the officers did not find them in the prison, and they went back and reported them. The officers would have been the temple guards. These are the security officers, and the ones who were armed and enforcers. They were the physical muscle of the spiritual weapon of the status quo. They would have been at the bid and calling of the temple high priest, essentially. And they go empty-handed and come back with only the excuse and the explanation that they are not there. They could not bring them. Saying, "We found the prison shut in all safety, and the watches standing outside before the doors. But having opened them, we found no one inside." They found no one inside because there was no one to be found inside. They had been liberated. They had been unlocked and unleashed and liberated and sent out outside of the prison and into the very temple, the very site where they were, their activity had raised the awareness, which culminated in their arrest and imprisonment. And so they report what they see. We weren't disobedient. We're just telling you that there's no one there to bring to you. We took the due diligence the night before, and they were there last night, but they're not there today. Something must have happened, and we did the due diligence. We locked it all. They were securely placed. And as the high priest and the captain of the temple and the chief priest heard these words, they were puzzled and wondered what this might be. So they had sent the command. These are, the highest ranking people in the temple. The high priest would have been Caiaphas, as recognized by Rome, but the Jewish people, they insisted that the high priest office was one of life. They would have recognized Annas, who was his, not to be confused with Ananias, who was Caiaphas's father-in-law. And 5 of his sons ended up serving. I think Jonathan was the final one when the temple would not be around much longer. In some, a little under 40 years, it would be devastated and ruined. Not a single stone would be left by the time the Romans got through with it. But there was still a temple, and the Sadducees would go extinct after the destruction of the temple. The Pharisees survive as the ancestors and progenitors of today's Orthodox Jews. But they knew they had given the command, and they trusted these men. They came. They had no reason to doubt that they had not locked them up at night, and now they're not here. They have no reason to doubt that either. So they're puzzled and perplexed because how could this be? And they do not consider the possibility that there is a supernatural power working on their behalf. They just miss the sign. But one came and reported to them, saying, "Look, the men whom you put in prison are standing in the temple and teaching the people." So they're right under their very nose. These are the temple guards. They had put them in public prison. We're not aware of the location or if it was attached to the temple complex, but there might have been a prison certainly near the temple. But, for whatever reason, we found them. They're not where we placed them, but we know where they are. They are under our very nose. They're in this temple, this complex as we speak right now, and they are teaching the people. They are proclaiming the myth of the resurrection that they were determined to suppress at all hazard and health. They didn't want these people teaching in the name and in the power and doing all these miracles and ultimately drawing people away from them and taking away their disciples, just encroaching on their converts while evangelizing for their own. 26th and final verse. Then the captain went with the officers and brought them, not with force, for they feared the people, lest they should be stoned. So they do not physically seize them or use weapons or they just tell them to come along, and the apostles are dutiful and compliant to the request. So, they feared the people. They didn't want to make a scene. They didn't want to resort to violence in the company because they knew that the crowd, the temple, everyone who's being taught and amazed is in their corner, so they don't want to upset the people. These people are a threat to, because the crowd is clearly in their corner, but they whisk them away, and the apostles and disciples go willingly because they know that they are being called to answer as a testimony. They had to know that when the angel was sending them there, that they would be seized once more and brought and made to answer for the contents of their teaching. That's all the time we have today. We'll read of the trial and the contents thereof sometime soon, and the providential intervention of Gamaliel. Saul, as he was then known, who became Paul, the greatest Christian, was early the most violent antagonist of the Christian faith, but his mentor, Gamaliel, was a rather moderate one, and he was prudent, and he recognized the futility of suppressing this movement, that it might be of God, and if you suppress it, then you are working against God. So that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.